Hello and welcome to Classic Motorsport Podcasts. I'm Gareth Thomas and today we're looking at F1 races of the 1960s, top 10. And number 10 on the list, Monaco 1960. Basically it started off with Joe Bonnier going from like the second row into the lead with the front row having wheel spin. Stowe Moss then took the lead. And then rain came. Moss had a spot plug change after a misfire, but luckily that was corrected by a spot plug change, and then charged his way through to victory in his first drive in a Wob Walker entered Lotus 18. It was also notable for the first race of a Saturn motorcycle racer called John Surtees. More on him later on. And because of the wet weather, only 4 finishers, and most guys had to restart their cars to get 1 or 2 points which were left. Number 9 on the list, South Africa, 1962. I have to say, having South Africa's final race of the season was quite interesting in 1962, but having it on December 29th is something I would not like to see. If it was done in between Christmas and New Year today, I don't think it would not go down well with fans, teams and drivers, because they would want to have Christmas at home. But they had to spend Christmas on the track in 1962 with a title battle between Jim Clark and Graham Hill. Most of the races were quite dull to watch, but this was very interesting to see. Clark led and then pulled away by over 20 seconds from Hill. However, a bolt fell off the climax engine of Clark's Lotus and sprayed oil on the track. Pulled in, his race was over. The engine had seized up. Hill continued to lead and went on to win the race. The first of 2 championships for Graham Hill. Number 8 on the list, 1963 Belgian Grand Prix at Spa. This is quite an interesting pick. Started off with Jim Clark leading, but then his gearbox started to jam out of 5th gear, and he had to drive one-handed at 9,500 RPMs or so, and then his gearbox problems worsened, and with the rain at Spa, won by almost 5 minutes. Number 7, 1968 German Grand Prix. Everyone was fearing for this race because 4 drivers were killed basically prior to the German Grand Prix in 68. First off, Jim Clark in April of 68. Then Mike Spence at May at Indianapolis. Then Ludovico Scafiati at a Hillcomb in June, and then Joe Slesser at the French Grand Prix in July. Having basically wet weather and something like a Grand Prix at the North Cypher made it really scary. And qualifying saw Jackie Hicks in a Ferrari on pole, but the race was due to start at its normal time, but it was delayed almost 2 hours because of the rain. When the race got started, it was Jackie Stewart who started 6th that went up into the lead and won by 4 minutes from Graham Hill, and I can tell you that was basically his second biggest margin in Formula 1. It was so dominant for Stewart, and afterwards he said visibility is so pathetically poor that I couldn't even see Chris Amons go in front of me. I'm simply driving into this great ball of spray. I pull out to pass him, but the spray is dense and I'm driving blind. And that was Stewart describing in his book, winning is not enough. And it was Stewart's best ever drive at the time, and I have to say it was one worth to see. But number 6 on the list is a Battle Royale in Monte Carlo. Sterling Moss versus the Ferraris. Moss, in an older Lotus 18, had to make do with the car because Lotus fuel suppliers refused to let Chapman give Rob Walker and his team the Lotus 21. And basically, with the Lotus 18 which Moss used throughout 1960, apart from the races where he was off recovering from injuries at Spa, which I did delve in a previous podcast, that the Lotus 18 was still one of the cars to race against, and Moss was still at the top of his game. At the start, Moss basically took the lead 10 laps or so in, and basically was driving on the limit and beyond. Lap after lap, the Ferraris of Phil Hill and Richie Ginther alternated to try and get to push Moss into a mistake, and the pair alternated every few laps to give it a go, but they couldn't move Moss out of the way, and Moss ended up winning Monaco for the third and final time. Number 5 is the 1966 French Grand Prix. Back then the fastest race on average until the 1971 Italian Grand Prix. But this race will be remembered by Jack Brabham winning his first race as a Brabham driver. And basically with an underpowered Wepco V8 compared to the Ferrari V12s and the Maserati V12s and the Coopers, it was quite a challenge for Brabham, and he managed to fend off Lorenzo Bandini to victory. And that's why I put that as my number 5 pick. Number 4 pick is the Mexican Grand Prix of 1964. Obviously, the Autodromo Hermanos Rodriguez circuit is well known for its big popularity. Back then it wasn't known as the Autodromo Hermanos Rodriguez. It was then known as the Magdalena Mixhuca. And basically, it had 3 drivers battling for the championship. Jim Clark in a Lotus, Graham Hill, BRM, and John Surtees, Ferrari. Obviously, Hill was leading the title race, but everyone after the race started went okay, and then Lorenzo Bandini, who was driving for Ferrari and a teammate to Surtees, took out Hill. According to Hill's then wife Betty, in an interview in the early 2000s, she said that Sterling Moss and Joe Bonnier planned to punch Bandini for what he did to Hill, but it was Graham that took them out of it. Now the championship looked like it was going to go to Jim Clark, but the same fate would happen to him as it did in 1962 in South Africa. A bolt had come loose out of the Climax engine in Clark's Lotus, and he ended up finishing 5th. Dan Gunny took the lead, won the race, but team orders came into play. Bandini had to give Surtees second place in order for Surtees to win the championship. That meant Surtees was world champion and the only man so far to win on 2 and 4 wheels. My top 3 picks are Monza races. First one, 1965, where it had the most lead changes in a Formula 1 race ever, 42. And it was between 4 different drivers. And those guys were Jackie Stewart, Graham Hill, Jim Clark and John Surtees. And this was 1965 Italian Grand Prix. And it's basically was a 4-car breakaway with them 4. First off was Surtees, who had clutch problems after how many laps? 34 laps. And then it was a 3-car breakaway with Hill, Stewart and Clark. Then Clark's fuel pump failed on lap 64 out of a 76 lap race, and now it was down to 2. Stewart took the lead, and everyone expected that he'd pull over and give Hill victory. and then on the last lap at the Parabolica, Hill moved too far and bounced across the grass, struggling to maintain grip on the mud and gravel. Stewart then took the win from Hill. Dan Gurney took third, and I have to say that was quite a dramatic race, perhaps one of the most dramatic in Monza. But the next two were just as dramatic. 1967, Jim Clark was on pole in a Lotus, but on lap 14 had a puncture. That put him one lap down on his teammate Graham Hill, who was leading. But Clark went through car by car, got his lap back, and not only that, by the final lap of the race, which he started, he was leading from John Surtees in a Honda and Jack Brabham in a Brabham. But Clark ran out of fuel. That meant it was down to two, Surtees or Brabham. Surtees was leading Brabham into Parabolica, but Brabham tried to overtake, but ran wide into the oil which was left by Hill's Lotus after he blew his engine. That meant Surtees was leading out Parabolica. Brabham tried to pass that by the start-finish line, but was a few tenths behind. It was Surtees' last career win and Honda's last until Jenson Button's victory in the 2006 Hungarian Grand Prix. The number one pick would be 1969 Italy. 4 drivers battling it out in the closing stages. Jackie Stewart, who was on course to win the title, and he needed to win the race to be champion. His teammate Jean-Pierre Beltrois, Bruce McLaren in his own McLaren, and Jochen Rindt in a Lotus. And on the final lap, Stewart was leading when he was passed by Beltrois, but Beltrois had to let him through in order for Stewart to win the race. But in doing so, Jochen Rindt had a big slipstream, but missed out. Beltrois was able to hang on to third, with McLaren fourth. Murray Walker described it in commentary: "That's the closest race he's ever seen," something like that. And I have to say that was basically one of the best endings to a race, and I have to say that is my number one pick. I hope you enjoyed listening to it. If you're on audio, remember to follow and subscribe, and if you're on video, remember, like, share and subscribe for more great content. I'm Gareth Thomas. Thank you for watching or listening. Goodbye.